My name is Isabella Moreno. I was 34 years old when I realized the house I had paid for with my grief, my discipline, and my silence was never considered mine at all. That realization didn't come gently. It came on a suffocating summer night in Dallas when the air outside vibrated with cicadas and the walls of my own dining room closed in around me like a courtroom. I was standing at the head of the long mahogany table I had chosen and paid for when Natalie, my boyfriend's younger sister, stormed in wearing heels too expensive for someone who hadn't worked in years. Her designer purse swung like a weapon at her side as she stopped directly in front of me. "You need to pack your things and leave," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to her. I laughed once, short, disbelieving, because surely this was a joke. Then I looked around. My boyfriend Ethan sat back in his chair, arms crossed, lips curled into a lazy smirk I barely recognized anymore. His parents, Linda and George, didn't say a word. They nodded, slowly, in agreement. Natalie continued, her eyes scanning me like I was an inconvenience that had overstayed its welcome. "People who sit at home all day playing on laptops don't deserve houses like this," she said. "You should find yourself a small studio downtown, somewhere more appropriate." Something inside my chest went very still. This was my house. The down payment had come from my savings. The mortgage, $7,500 every single month, had never missed a payment. The utilities, the furniture, the appliances, the upgrades, all mine. But none of them looked at me like I belonged there. To them, I was just a woman who stayed home. I work as a software engineer, fully remote, for a rapidly growing tech firm that contracts with enterprise clients across Texas. My days are filled with system architecture decisions, late-night deployments, and meetings that determine whether million-dollar projects succeed or collapse. But to Ethan's family, remote work didn't exist. If you weren't exhausted and dirty when you came home, your labor was imaginary. Natalie tilted her head, smiling as if she were doing me a favor. "Ethan works hard," she said. "He built all this. You just benefit." The silence that followed was worse than the insult. Ethan could have corrected her with one sentence. One sentence would have ended everything. Instead, he chuckled. That sound cut deeper than anything Natalie had said. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man enjoying my humiliation. In that moment, the years rearranged themselves in my head. The comments, the jokes, the way my work was dismissed, the way my money quietly disappeared into our life while my value shrank. I felt heat crawl up my spine, but I kept my voice calm. "This is my house," I said. "I pay for it." Natalie burst out laughing. Linda shook her head in disappointment. George muttered something about delusions. Then Ethan stood up. "Stop embarrassing yourself," he snapped, his face flushing. "You're making things uncomfortable." That's when he reached into a folder and slid it across the table. "Divorce papers, already filled out. Sign," he said, "or I promise this will get worse." The room spun. I thought about my parents, about the accident, about everything I had survived. And something hardened. "Fine," I said quietly. Their relief was immediate, almost joyful. Natalie clapped. Linda smiled. George leaned back. They thought they had won. They had no idea the game had just started. Before I became the woman they dismissed so easily, before I was reduced to someone who plays on a laptop all day, I was just a daughter who had lost everything. My parents died when I was 28. The memory still comes back in fragments. Rain hitting asphalt, a phone vibrating on my desk long after office hours, a voice on the other end that kept apologizing while explaining things no one should ever have to hear. Their car had spun out on a slick highway outside Dallas. One moment they were driving home from dinner, the next they were gone. Just like that, I was alone. No siblings, no extended family, no one to sit beside me in the hospital hallway or help sort through the quiet violence of paperwork that follows death. I moved through the weeks after the funeral like a ghost, showing up to work, staring at screens, pretending my chest didn't feel permanently hollowed out. 3 weeks after the funeral, I met Ethan. It was a gray afternoon, rain streaking down the windows of the office building where I still worked on site back then. I was standing in a quiet hallway near the service elevators, staring out at the storm, trying not to cry for the 3rd time that day. I didn't hear him approach. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" I turned, startled, embarrassed by the tears I hadn't managed to stop. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a maintenance uniform with his name stitched over the pocket. His eyes were warm in a way that felt almost intrusive at the time. I should have said I was fine. I should have brushed him off. Instead, something in me broke open. I told him everything. The accident, the funeral, the silence waiting for me at home, the way grief followed me into every room, no matter how hard I tried to outrun it. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer cliches, didn't rush to fix me. When I finally stopped talking, he nodded slowly. "I'm really close to my parents," he said. "I can't imagine losing them. You must be incredibly strong just to still be standing." No one had called me strong before that moment. We started talking whenever his shift brought him to my floor. Short conversations that turned into shared coffee breaks, then dinners, then long walks where I talked, and he listened like my pain mattered. Ethan didn't push me to move on. He didn't tell me grief had a timeline. He let me exist inside it, and at the time, that felt like love. 6 months later, we were officially together. He introduced me to his parents, Linda and George, at their modest home outside Arlington. They knew about my loss. They hugged me longer than necessary. Linda cooked too much food and insisted I take leftovers. George called me kiddo in a way that felt protective. For the first time since my parents died, I felt something like safety. Sunday dinners became a ritual. Laughter returned to my life in small, cautious doses. I told myself I was healing, that I was building something new. A year after that rainy hallway conversation, Ethan and I got married. There was no elaborate proposal, no grand speech, just a quiet decision between 2 people who believed companionship was enough. We rented an apartment near his parents and settled into what I thought was a partnership. That's when I made my first mistake. I transitioned to remote work. A tech startup offered me flexibility without sacrificing pay, and at the time, it felt like the right move. Ethan talked about wanting a family someday, about stability, about being home more. My salary remained strong, stronger than his by far, so I suggested I cover our expenses. Rent, groceries, utilities, insurance, everything. "You're amazing with money," he told me. "I trust you." He saved his entire paycheck. I paid without question. What I didn't tell him was about the life insurance money my parents had left behind. I'd invested it carefully, quietly. I'd watched it grow with discipline born from loss. That money felt sacred, like the last thing my parents could give me. I kept it separate. I kept it secret. Ethan never asked. At first, the arrangement worked, but slowly his comments shifted. He'd come home exhausted from physical labor and glance at me on video calls. "Must be nice," he'd joke, getting paid to sit at home. I laughed at first. Then I stopped. The jokes didn't stop. They sharpened. By the time Linda and George moved in temporarily after their house was destroyed in a flood, the narrative had already begun to tilt. They didn't understand remote work. They didn't try to. If I wasn't commuting, I wasn't contributing. And Ethan, let them believe it. I cooked. I cleaned. I worked late into the night. I paid every bill. And slowly, invisibly, I disappeared from the story they were telling themselves. The house we would later build, the one that would nearly destroy me, was supposed to be an act of love, of gratitude, of family. I didn't see the warning signs. I was too busy trying to replace what I'd lost. And Ethan was already learning how easy it was to take credit for someone else's sacrifices. At first, the changes were so subtle I convinced myself I was imagining them. It started with tone. The way Linda would sigh when she walked past my home office, pausing just long enough for me to notice. The way George would comment, not directly to me, but loud enough to be heard, about how real work exhausted a man's body, and the way Ethan never corrected them. I was working longer hours than ever. The startup had grown fast, and with growth came pressure. My calendar was a battlefield of overlapping meetings, late-night deployments, and emergency calls that dragged on past midnight. I coded through migraines. I answered emails during dinner. I carried entire projects on my back because clients trusted me. But to the people sharing my roof, all they saw was a woman sitting in a chair, staring at screens. Linda would knock once before opening my office door, regardless of whether I was mid-call. "Is now a good time?" she'd ask, already stepping inside. "The laundry needs switching." George started commenting on the electricity bill. "All these computers running all day," he muttered once. "No wonder it's high." I explained, patiently, repeatedly. I tried to describe remote infrastructure, global clients, time zones. Their eyes glazed over every time. "And Ethan?" Ethan started joking along. "She just types all day," he'd say with a grin. "I keep telling her she's got it easy." Each time he said it, something tightened inside me. I pulled him aside more than once. "Why do you let them talk about my work like that?" I asked quietly one night. "You know what I do." He shrugged. "They're old school," he said. "They don't get it. Just ignore it. Ignore it." That became his solution for everything. Then not at home, not at first, but with friends, neighbors, distant relatives. I heard it accidentally one evening when we hosted a small gathering. A coworker of George's complimented Ethan on his success. "You must be doing really well to afford a place like this," the man said. Ethan laughed. "Yeah, I worked my way up," he replied casually. "A lot of long hours." I froze. Worked his way up? To what? "Why did you say that?" I asked. "You made it sound like what?" he interrupted. "Relax. People assume things." But the assumptions kept growing. Soon, Linda was thanking Ethan openly for taking care of everything. George started telling people his son was in management. Natalie bragged to friends about her brother's corporate connections. And every time, I vanished from the narrative. I was no longer the woman paying the bills. I was the woman benefiting from his success. The lie didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, dressed as convenience, as pride, as something not worth correcting, until it was. I confronted Ethan again after overhearing him tell someone he worked at my company, not as maintenance, but as a corporate employee involved in strategy. "That's not harmless," I said, my voice shaking. "That makes me look like nothing." He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting," he said. "They don't need the details." But the details mattered, because once the story was rewritten, their behavior toward me shifted completely. Linda stopped thanking me for groceries. George stopped including me in conversations about the house. Natalie started making jokes, not quietly, not accidentally. "So what game are you playing today?" she'd ask with a smirk. "Must be nice not having a boss." Ethan never shut her down. By the time we seriously discussed building a larger house after Linda and George lost theirs to the flood, I should have known something was wrong, but I was still chasing the idea of family. The flood had been devastating, their home destroyed, decades of memories washed away in hours. I remembered how they'd supported me after my parents died, and guilt twisted in my chest at the thought of them struggling. I suggested we build something together, a house with space, comfort, stability. Ethan loved the idea immediately. "See," he said to his parents, "I've got you." I didn't correct him. That silence cost me everything. As plans came together, I handled the finances, as always. The mortgage would be in my name. The down payment would come from my savings. My income qualified us easily. Ethan attended meetings but rarely paid attention. He'd scroll through his phone while I discussed interest rates. He'd nod vaguely when numbers were explained. But afterward, he'd tell his parents he was handling everything, and they believed him. Every upgrade I approved, every additional expense I covered, was quietly credited to him. I asked him, pleaded with him, to stop. "We're supposed to be partners," I said. "Just tell them the truth." He smiled indulgently. "Let me have this," he said. They need to see me as successful. I swallowed my discomfort because I didn't want to seem selfish. That was my second mistake. By the time the house was completed, I was already a guest in my own life. The rules were unspoken, but absolute. My work was an inconvenience. My presence was conditional. My contributions were invisible. And the lie, the one that painted Ethan as the provider and me as the freeloader, had hardened into something unbreakable. I didn't know it yet, but I was already being prepared for removal. I just hadn't been told. The house was supposed to fix everything. That's what I told myself as we stood on the empty lot for the first time. Red Texas clay clinging to our shoes, while the architect unfolded glossy blueprints against the hood of his truck. This would be a fresh start, a shared future, a place where the tension would dissolve once everyone had space to breathe. I believed that because I needed to believe it. Linda and George had lost their home in the flood almost overnight. Water damage warped the floors, ruined the foundation, and turned decades of memories into soggy debris. They never complained outright, but the grief sat heavy in their shoulders, in the way Linda clutched salvaged photo albums like life rafts. I remembered how they had fed me when I barely ate, how they had checked on me after my parents died. So when I suggested building a house big enough for all of us, it felt right. Ethan was enthusiastic immediately. "We'll do this together," he said, arm around my waist. "A real family home." I handled the numbers. The down payment came from my personal savings, money I had guarded for years, earned through discipline and grief and quiet sacrifice. The mortgage went into my name alone. With my salary, the bank approved everything without hesitation. $7,500 a month. Every month. For decades. I didn't flinch. We chose a 2-story contemporary design in an upscale Dallas suburb. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound porch, high ceilings that let the light pour in like forgiveness. Linda had requests. "A bedroom on the main floor," she said softly, "just in case." George asked for wider doorways. A walk-in shower with safety bars. I approved everything. Ethan had ideas too. A state-of-the-art home theater system. Smart lighting throughout the house. Premium appliances. A custom bar. "If we're doing this," he said, grinning, "let's do it right." Each upgrade pushed the budget higher. I agreed anyway. I told myself we were building memories, that this was what love looked like. Construction took nearly a year. I paid deposits, I approved invoices, I stayed on top of timelines and costs while still working full-time. Ethan attended meetings sporadically, usually late, usually distracted. But when people asked about the house, he spoke like the architect. I wanted something open concept. I insisted on quality materials. I made sure my parents would be comfortable. I corrected him once, gently. "Maybe say we," I suggested. He laughed. "You're too sensitive." By the time the house was finished, the story had already solidified. At the housewarming party, Linda introduced Ethan as the one who had made it all happen. George toasted to his son's success. Natalie bragged loudly about how hard Ethan worked to give us all this. I stood in the kitchen, smiling politely, holding a glass of wine I hadn't tasted, listening to my own erasure celebrated out loud. When I tried to speak up, even subtly, the room shifted. Awkward. Uncomfortable. So I stopped. Moving in didn't bring relief. It brought rules. Linda treated my home office like a shared space. She'd walk in without knocking, comment on my posture, ask why I was still working when dinner was almost ready. George complained openly about my schedule. "You're always busy," he said one night, "but Ethan comes home exhausted every day." Ethan nodded along. "She doesn't know when to unplug," he told them. I stared at him across the table, stunned. He never defended me, never clarified, never acknowledged that my income kept the lights on. Instead, he started complaining about me. "She's always on that laptop. She forgets the house needs attention. She doesn't contribute like she should." Each comment chipped away at me. I started working from coffee shops downtown just to escape the atmosphere in my own home. I took calls in my car. I ate lunch alone. When I begged Ethan to tell them the truth, he snapped. "They won't understand," he said. Why do you care so much? Because I was disappearing. Because the house I paid for felt hostile. Because the lie was poisoning everything. Natalie arrived shortly after, uninvited and unapologetic. She claimed she was starting over, that she needed space, that Dallas felt right. She took over the guest room like she owned it, spread her things everywhere, critiqued everything I did. She doesn't even have a real job, Natalie announced one afternoon while I was on a call, gesturing toward my office. Ethan supports all of us. No one corrected her. Not once. I cooked every night, cleaned constantly, paid every bill. And then came the dinner that ended it all. It was one of those thick summer evenings when the air conditioning struggled and tempers rose with the heat. We were halfway through the meal when Natalie leaned forward, eyes bright with something sharp and cruel. "I've been thinking," she said sweetly. "I should stay here permanently." Linda beamed. "This house is too nice for someone who doesn't even work," Natalie continued, looking straight at me. "You should move out." Linda clapped her hands. "Honestly, it makes sense," she said. "You're home all day doing nothing anyway." George nodded. "Ethan shouldn't have to carry someone like that." I looked at Ethan. He laughed. That was the sound that broke me. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "This is my house," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I paid for it. Every cent." Natalie laughed in my face. Linda called me ungrateful. George called me delusional. Then Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "Stop lying," he shouted. "You're embarrassing me." He reached into a folder and pulled out papers. Divorce papers, already signed by him. "Sign," he said, "or I'll make this worse." I stared at him, at all of them, and I understood something with terrifying clarity. They didn't want me gone because I was weak. They wanted me gone because I was no longer useful. So I signed, and they celebrated. They had no idea they'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy the lie they built their lives on. The moment my pen left the paper, the energy in the room shifted. Relief flooded their faces, not guilt, not regret, not even curiosity. Relief, as if I had finally agreed to stop inconveniencing them with my existence. Ethan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Natalie clapped her hands together, laughing. Linda leaned back in her chair, satisfied. George muttered something about finally doing the right thing. I sat. "Good," Ethan said, collecting the papers. "We'll handle the rest quickly." Handle the rest. As if the years I had poured into that house, that family, that illusion of partnership were just administrative details. Natalie was already planning. "We should go somewhere to celebrate," she said brightly. "Somewhere tropical. Somewhere expensive." Linda's eyes lit up. "Oh, that would be wonderful, after everything we've been through." Ethan grinned. "You deserve it," he told them. No one looked at me. No one asked where I would go. No one asked what I needed. No one even pretended to care. "Make sure you're moved out while we're gone," Ethan said casually, like he was reminding me to take out the trash. "We want to come back to a clean slate." I nodded. "Of course." That was the moment Natalie truly revealed herself. She followed me into the kitchen later that night, heels clicking sharply against the tile. "You know," she said, leaning against the counter, "this all worked out better than I expected." I didn't respond. "You were never really part of this family," she continued. "You were just useful." Useful. She smiled as if she'd paid me a compliment. "I'm glad you're being mature about it," she added. "Some women get emotional." I turned to face her then. She was watching me carefully, waiting for tears, for anger, for humiliation. She got none of it. "Enjoy the house," I said calmly. "It's expensive." She laughed. Ethan's got it covered. That lie was going to be very costly. The next few days passed in a blur of forced politeness and quiet calculation. Ethan strutted around the house like he'd won something. He talked loudly on the phone about new beginnings and finally being free. Linda and George discussed redecorating. Natalie posted pictures online captioned, "Family first." No one noticed me packing. Not really. They assumed I was folding clothes and sorting memories. They didn't realize I was inventorying. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every fixture I had purchased with my money. The leather sectional in the living room, the stainless steel refrigerator, the dining table where they'd humiliated me, the smart TV, the washer and dryer, all of it. Ethan avoided conversations about finances entirely. When I mentioned the mortgage, he waved it off. "It's handled," he said. "The bank stuff is boring." He signed whatever was put in front of him without reading. Mortgage transfer forms, liability acknowledgments, pages and pages of responsibility. He never asked questions. He never listened when the bank representative explained the numbers carefully, slowly, like speaking to a child. $7,500 monthly, she said more than once. "Are you comfortable with that?" Ethan nodded, scrolling through his phone. "I've got it," he said. I asked him one last time, quietly, when we were alone. "Are you sure you can manage this?" He laughed. "Why are you still worrying about my finances?" he said. "That's not your problem anymore." He was right. It wasn't. The day they left for their celebratory vacation, the house felt hollow. Suitcases rolled across the floor. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Natalie posed for photos by the front door. Linda hugged Ethan tightly. George patted him on the back like a hero. No one hugged me. Ethan paused at the door. "You'll be gone when we get back, right?" he asked. I smiled softly. "Yes." The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in years. That's when I started making calls. Within hours, everything was in motion. Furniture buyers, appliance resale services, movers, listings. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second guess. I didn't feel guilty. By the time the sun set that evening, the living room was bare. The house echoed. By the second day, the kitchen was empty. By the third, the bedrooms. I left nothing behind that I had paid for. I packed my personal belongings last. Clothes, documents, the framed photo of my parents I kept hidden in my office drawer. I walked through the empty house once before leaving. It looked enormous without furniture. Cold, exposed. A palace without a throne. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. I moved into a temporary place downtown. Quiet, clean, anonymous. I slept better than I had in years. 3 days later, my phone rang. "Ethan." I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, and another. Finally, curiosity won. "Where is everything?" he demanded the moment I answered. "What did you do?" I leaned back on the couch, calm. "I sold it," I said. "It was mine." He exploded. "You can't do that." I already did. He screamed about theft, about respect, about how unfair I was being. "You wanted the house," I reminded him. "You got it." I hung up. I blocked his number. For the first time since my parents died, I felt something close to control. They thought Natalie had won. They thought the papers meant the end. But she hadn't started a war. She'd handed me permission. And Ethan had just signed his name to the consequences. Freedom doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in paperwork, signatures, and a sudden absence of noise. The week after I left the house was the most methodical of my life. While Ethan and his family were posting filtered photos from turquoise beaches and overpriced cocktails, I was sitting in air-conditioned offices across Dallas, finalizing the future they thought they had secured. My divorce attorney didn't flinch when I explained everything. She read the documents carefully. She nodded once, and then she smiled, slow and sharp. "They really think they won," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and I'd like to keep it that way." We expedited everything. Property responsibility transfer, mortgage liability confirmation, asset separation. Every legal step was clean, documented, irreversible. The mortgage was officially Ethan's. $7,500 a month, in his name alone, with his income alone. The bank officer had asked him, twice, if he was sure. He'd barely looked up from his phone. By the time the final documents were filed, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I had been carrying a weight I didn't realize was optional. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I simply moved forward. With the divorce finalized, I made the decision that terrified me once and liberated me instantly. I bought a penthouse. Downtown Dallas. High-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows. concierge security. I paid cash. The money I'd invested quietly for years, the inheritance I protected like a last promise to my parents, made the purchase almost effortless. The real estate agent's eyes widened when I signed. "You have excellent taste," she said. I smiled politely. No one there knew my story. No one questioned how I worked. No one treated me like an inconvenience. For the first time in years, my home reflected who I actually was. Clean lines, modern art, a dedicated office flooded with light. No floral wallpaper, no unsolicited commentary, no doors opening without permission. I slept deeply. Meanwhile, Ethan was unraveling. I didn't hear from him for nearly 2 weeks after I blocked his number. I assumed, correctly, that he was enjoying the illusion of victory. Then the calls started again. Unknown numbers, voicemails, text from shared contacts. I ignored them all. Until one evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the city glow beneath me, my phone buzzed with a voicemail I didn't block fast enough. "Isabella," Ethan's voice cracked. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. The next voicemail was angrier. "What kind of person empties a house like that?" he snapped. "You humiliated me." I deleted it. The third voicemail came days later. It was different. Panicked. "What is this?" he demanded. "Why is the bank sending statements?" I paused. I replayed it twice. Then I called him back. He answered immediately. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shouted. $7,500 every month? That can't be right. I leaned against the balcony railing, the city humming below me. "It's exactly right," I said calmly. "You set me up," he accused. "No," I replied. "You just never listened." He tried to explain or justify or rewrite reality. He thought the house was mostly paid off. He assumed the money came from somewhere. He believed it would all work itself out. "Can't you help?" he asked, his voice shifting. "Just until I figure things out?" "No," I said. Silence stretched between us. Then desperation. "We were married," he whispered. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I thought about the years I paid for everything, the nights I defended him, the humiliation I swallowed. "It meant something," I said, "until you decided I didn't." I hung up. I blocked the number again. That should have been the end. It wasn't. A month later, the calls returned. Frantic, relentless. The bank had begun formal foreclosure proceedings. Ethan had ignored the notices. Linda had insisted it was a mistake. Natalie had assured everyone I'd come around. I hadn't. When Ethan finally reached me again, through an unblocked email, his tone was unrecognizable. "I don't know what to do," he wrote. "They're taking the house." I didn't reply. Through mutual acquaintances, the truth trickled back to me. They had blown their savings on the vacation. Natalie had no income. Linda and George expected Ethan to handle it. The mortgage alone was more than his monthly paycheck. When the final foreclosure notice arrived, panic consumed them. Ethan called again. "They're seizing it," he said. "Please, you can pay it off." I was chopping vegetables in my kitchen when the call came through. My hands didn't shake. "You wanted to be the provider," I said. "Provide." He started crying. I ended the call. 3 weeks later, the house was officially seized. The auction sign appeared in the yard. Neighbors whispered. Friends disappeared. The family that once dismissed me as worthless was suddenly scrambling for survival. They moved into a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Arguments spilled into hallways. Police were called. Blame was thrown like knives. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. My life had become quiet, peaceful. I worked without interruption. I hosted friends who respected me. I breathed. One evening, while sipping wine on my balcony, I realized something important. I hadn't ruined them. I had simply stopped saving them from themselves. They had built their lives on a lie, one that required my silence and my money to survive. The moment I withdrew both, it collapsed. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible. I felt free. The first time I heard about the foreclosure, I was halfway through a yoga class. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my locker. vibrating against the metal like something urgent was trying to claw its way back into my life. I ignored it until class ended, until my breathing slowed and the familiar calm settled in my chest. When I finally checked, there were 7 missed calls, all from Ethan. I didn't return them. I knew what they meant. Foreclosure notices don't whisper. They arrive certified. They demand attention. And once they do, denial stops working. That night, as I cooked dinner in my penthouse kitchen, my phone rang again. A new number this time. I answered out of curiosity, not concern. "Isabella," Ethan said immediately. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw by panic. "Please don't hang up." I stayed silent. "They're taking the house," he continued, words tumbling over each other. "The bank says it's going to auction. I don't understand how it got this bad so fast." I turned down the stove and leaned against the counter. "It didn't get bad fast," I said. "It was always bad. You just never looked." He tried to argue. He said the bank hadn't explained it properly. He said he thought I'd help. He said his parents were terrified. "They're screaming all the time," he admitted. "Natalie says this is all your fault." I almost laughed. "Of course she does," I said calmly. He lowered his voice then, as if humility might soften me. "I can't do this alone," he said. "Please, just help me for a few months." I pictured him standing in that empty house, the echoing rooms, the bare floors, the absence of everything I had once chosen with care. I imagined Linda pacing, George blaming, Natalie plotting. And for a brief moment, I felt something that surprised me. Not anger. Pity. "No," I said. The word landed between us like a locked door. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "We'll be on the street." "You should have understood," I replied. "When you laughed." He went quiet. Then desperate. "You're living in luxury now," he said bitterly. "You could save us." "I'm living with the consequences of my decisions," I corrected. "So are you." I ended the call. The next update came from a mutual acquaintance a week later. The auction date was set. Ethan had stopped going to work regularly. Linda had called relatives asking for loans. Natalie disappeared for days at a time, then returned with excuses that didn't add up. No one helped. It turns out, people are less generous when the hero of the story turns out to be imaginary. The day the house officially changed hands, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no messages. I imagined the sign in the yard, the strangers walking through the rooms, the lie evaporating with every step. A few nights later, Ethan called one last time. I almost didn't answer. "I don't expect anything," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. "I just wanted to say I didn't think it would end like this." I looked out over the city, lights blinking steadily against the dark. "I did," I said. He sighed. "I should have listened." "Yes," I agreed. Then I hung up. I didn't block him after that. There was no need. The calls stopped on their own. I didn't hear about the arrests until a week after the house was officially auctioned. The news didn't come from Ethan. It came from Rebecca, a neighbor who lived 2 streets over from the old house, the one I used to call home. She called me late one evening, her voice low and cautious, like she wasn't sure whether to congratulate me or apologize. "I didn't know if you'd want to hear this," she said, "but things got bad. Really bad." I sat on my couch, city lights spilling in through the windows, a glass of wine untouched on the table. "Tell me," I said. Apparently, the apartment they moved into was worse than anything they'd expected. A rundown complex on the edge of the city. Thin walls, broken locks, roaches that came out at night like clockwork. Linda couldn't stop complaining. Natalie couldn't stop blaming. George drank more than he admitted. Ethan worked longer hours, overtime whenever he could get it, trying to hold everything together with a paycheck that had never been meant to carry 4 adults and a mountain of debt. They fought constantly. Neighbors complained. Voices spilled into the parking lot. Doors slammed. Insults flew. The night it finally exploded, Rebecca said, police lights painted the building red and blue. Ethan and George got into a physical fight. Shouting, shoving. Years of resentment poured out all at once. Natalie screamed. Linda tried to intervene. Someone called the police. All 4 of them were taken in. Mugshots, charges, public humiliation. Rebecca paused before adding, "It made the local paper." I thanked her for telling me and hung up. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance. Their lives no longer intersected with mine. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the listing. The house, my house, had sold at auction for far less than it was worth. The bank recovered what it could. Ethan recovered nothing. That chapter was over. My life, meanwhile, had quietly expanded. I filled my penthouse with people who respected boundaries. Friends who didn't ask why I worked from home. Neighbors who understood ambition and solitude equally. I joined a yoga studio where no one interrupted my practice. Took cooking classes where laughter came easily. Hosted small dinners where conversation flowed without judgment. I worked without apology. I slept without fear. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who paid to be loved, the one who believed silence was the price of belonging. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her one thing: you don't have to earn your right to exist. Ethan tried to reach me once more, months later. An email this time. Short, careful. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been wrong. He asked if we could talk. I read it once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to stay closed. I took a solo trip to New Orleans that fall. Walked through jazz-filled streets. Sat alone in cafes without feeling lonely. Watched the Mississippi roll by and thought about how grief had once convinced me I needed anyone who offered comfort. Grief lies. It tells you survival is the same as love. It isn't. Love doesn't diminish you. It doesn't erase your contributions. It doesn't laugh when you're humiliated. I returned to Dallas lighter, stronger, whole. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard pieces of their aftermath. Ethan kept his job, barely. Linda and George struggled to find work. Natalie bounced between friends, her charm wearing thinner each time. They blamed each other endlessly. No one blamed the lie. And I realized something else then. I hadn't won because they lost. I had won because I stopped losing myself. My parents' memory lives on, not in the money they left me, but in the spine they gave me, the one I finally used. The house is gone. The marriage is gone. The illusion is gone. What remains is peace. If there's anything my story proves, it's this. Silence protects abusers, not families. And walking away isn't failure. It's survival with dignity. I don't wish them harm. I simply refuse to carry their weight ever again. And that, more than revenge, is freedom.